And I want you first to look at what Americans say about immigrants when it comes to the economy, crime, and social and moral issues. Some of what you were just saying is reflected in this poll. A majority of Americans think immigrants are having a detrimental effect on the U.S. economy. And what I find most interesting about this poll is how crime ranks equally with the economy when it comes to the perceived negative impact of immigrants. It is unfortunate that so much of the public dialogue and political rhetoric centers on the erroneous idea that immigration is a disadvantage to America, that it's our weak point, that's the root of our shortcomings. The data you will see now will show how immigrants, the diversity of America's people, has and will continue to be America's advantage. And one of the first myths is about how many immigrants we have today. With all the talk that we're hearing, one would expect America to be overrun with immigrants and refugees. But here are the facts. Yes, America is the world's leading destination for immigrants. But the immigrant share of population today is not the highest it has ever been. The number is, of course, higher, 42 million. But today's immigrant share of population is actually about the same as it was in 1860, about 13.3% of the population. Similarly, when it comes to refugees, there's no willy-nilly number that allowed into the country. While yes, the United States is the world's top resettlement country for refugees, the number of persons who may be admitted is established by the President and Congress. There was a peak in '93 for about 142,000 in response to the Balkan Wars, but in the past few years there has been a steady decline, and it's almost plateaued around 70,000. And then there is that Mexican thing. The majority of immigrants to America, yes, they've come from Mexico. But the share of Mexican immigrants has declined to almost a net standstill. The fastest growing immigrant group today is Asian. More immigrants from China and India come to the U.S. than from Mexico. How is that possible? Well, in a reversal of one of the largest mass migrations in modern history, net migration flows from Mexico to the U.S. has turned negative since 2009. Asia has replaced Latin America as the biggest source of new immigrants, and they are now the only major group whose numbers are rising primarily because of immigration. There were declines in undocumented immigrants in 7 states, including California. More Mexicans are leaving the U.S. than entering. And we talked about taxes just now, that immigrants don't pay taxes, that they're lazy. Immigrants pay taxes that support social systems that benefit mostly U.S.-born Americans. They pay up to $140 billion a year in federal, state, and local taxes. And when it comes to undocumented immigrants, using ITINs, or individual taxpayer identification numbers, undocumented immigrants paid almost $12 billion in taxes last year. They pay into systems that they don't benefit from unless they become full-fledged citizens. And this is something that America needs. We talked about social systems. So what about Medicare? Immigrants are subsidizing Medicare's core trust fund. From 1996 to 2011, immigrants contributed over $180 billion more to Medicare's hospital insurance trust fund than was expended on their benefits. The status quo is unsustainable, so we need more workers like this. 10,000 baby boomers are going on Social Security and Medicare every day between now and 2030. People are paying taxes to support a level of benefits for today's seniors that they have no realistic chance of receiving when they become old. Look at this. In 1950, there were 16 workers for every person in retirement. In 2015, 3. It's the main reason immigrants come here, to work, to create better lives for themselves and their children. They come with the intention of working. So most immigrants to the U.S. are in their prime working age. Note the belly in the graph there. Immigrants make up an outsized share of the labor force, 16.7%, compared to their share of population, which is 13%. Immigrants were responsible for more than half the growth of the labor force in the past decade, And this is something that we need as more baby boomers retire and that America's population continues to age. One area where we can really see the impact of immigrants in the labor force is healthcare. We've all had the experience of a foreign-born doctor, surgeon, nurse, or pharmacist. But in under 10 years from now, America will face a projected shortage of nearly 100,000 doctors. By 2020, more than 1.3 million additional direct care workers will be needed, like home health aides and nursing assistants. In the end, the data finds that immigrants are nearly twice as likely as the US-born to work as physicians, surgeons, and even home health aides. We spoke about baby boomers a little while ago. Who's going to take care of them? The fact is, immigrants create jobs. By expanding companies, they create jobs in downstream and satellite industries for the US-born. Economics is not a zero-sum game. Look at this. By 2020, and that's just in 4 years from now, 700,000 American jobs in every state will be created by the high-skilled foreign workers awarded H-1B visas. And remember, we only allow about, 65 to 85,000 of these high-skilled visas a year. 2 of the top 10 states, Michigan and Pennsylvania, gaining the most jobs from recent H-1B workers are in the Rust Belt, an area hit particularly hard by the recession. This is something that America needs and benefits from. How do they create jobs? They also create jobs as entrepreneurs. That strong desire to create a better life for themselves, the act of migrating is itself entrepreneurial. Immigrants own 18% of small businesses. Again, they make up 13% of the population, and are more than twice as likely to own a business. Even throughout the recession, immigrants increased the rate by which they started businesses. And this is not a recent trend. Throughout American history, immigrants have started businesses. Look at Levi's, Budweiser, Kohl's, TJ Maxx, all the way up to today's Google, Yahoo, and PayPal. And then we look at immigrants' effect on crime. So what we've been seeing so far is more jobs, business generation. They've been affecting our economy in a very, very positive way. As it is, the impact on crime appears, according to the research, to be positive as well. Now, data for immigrants and criminality is not easy to come by. A lot of very intensive research has gone into this, and there's a general consensus that immigrants are less likely to be criminal. So between 1990 and 2013, even though the immigrant population grew from about 8% to 13%, and the number of undocumented immigrants more than tripled from 3.5 to 11.2 million, violent crime declined 48%. That's aggravated assault, robbery, rape, and murder. Property crime fell by 41%, including motor vehicle theft, larceny, robbery, and burglary. And when you look at our prisons, immigrants are less likely to be incarcerated. Now, you may have encountered a statistic somewhere about up to a quarter of the people in the prison system are foreign-born. That is not a reliable statistic, and it generally includes many, many immigrants who are there on immigration violations. And over the years, Congress has criminalized a lot of immigration violations. What we find is that even over the years, from 1980 to 2010, so a long span, about 1.6% of immigrant males aged 18 to 39 were incarcerated, compared to 3.3% of the native-born. This disparity in incarceration rates has existed for decades. And a vast majority of research have found this. Looking at census data, that cohort of male immigrants have lower institutionalization rates than the native-born, and that gap is actually widening over the years. So that by 2000, immigrants had institutional rates that were 1/5 those of the native-born. Again, much of this has been found by many different organizations and researchers, and when it comes to gathering data on the undocumented immigrants, it is much, much more difficult. several studies have been done looking at both deportable and non-deportable immigrants released from incarceration, and found that the share of immigrants prone to violent crime is so much lower than they would have us believe. And this has just been a trend that many researchers have found. And we must talk a little bit before we go about terror. This is something that has justifiably rattled a lot of Americans over the years, and calls for bans and limiting immigrants and refugees who come to the U.S. must be rooted in data. So when we look at the two most talked about groups, refugees and undocumented immigrants, a very recent risk analysis by the Cato Institute found that these are not the groups that you want to be focusing all your attention on. The fact is, the chance of an American being killed in a terrorist attack caused by a refugee is actually 1 in 3.64 billion per year. And the chance of being killed in a terrorist attack committed by an undocumented immigrant is an astronomical 1 in 10.9 billion. So undocumented immigrants and refugees are the ones who come here in extreme desperation. And perhaps that's not where we need to be focusing our energies. So if immigrants are having this positive effect on crime, why is that? There are several theories. One, of course, is the threat of deportation. Immigrants, whether they're documented or not, once they commit a crime, can automatically be deported. There has been greater interior immigration enforcement of undocumented immigrants, especially those who are violent criminals. And then there's what's known as the healthy immigrant thesis. Immigrants want to work. They are motivated and ambitious foreigners who leave everything behind to start all over, taking a huge risk. That does not indicate that they are prone to crime. People who would not have the kind of motivation to travel and risk everything to go into another country to live. So in the PowerPoint that you will receive next week, we will go into areas like welfare, English, assimilation, looking at American values. But for now, we will turn it over to the panel discussion that we will soon start. And before I do that, I just wanted to let you know of a great new service called Immigration Data on Demand from our Institute for Immigration Research. Punch in a few requests. You want to find out about Latino immigrants in a particular county who work in agriculture. You can get that in a fact sheet generated by our institute. It's a free service that I really encourage you to make use of. And so now we looked at the data of what is happening. We've had this long history of immigration that has benefited America, and when it comes to this talk about immigrants and crime, we really find that their criminality is so much lower than the pundits would have us believe.